One of the best stories which we recollect to have heard of a haunted house, is that which is related of the royal palace at Woodstock, in the year 1649, when the commissioners sent from London by the Long Parliament to take possession of it, and efface all the emblems of royalty about it, were fairly driven out by their fear of the devil. The commissioners, dreading at that time no devil, arrived at Woodstock on the 13th of October 1649. They took up their lodgings in the late king's apartments, earned the beautiful bedrooms and withdrawing rooms into kitchens and sculleries, the council hall into a brewhouse, and made the dining room a place to keep firewood in. They pulled down all the insignia of royal state, and treated with the utmost indignity everything that recalled to their memory the name or the majesty of Charles Stuart. One Giles Sharp accompanied them in the capacity of clerk, and seconded their efforts apparently with the greatest zeal. He aided them to uproot a noble old tree, merely because it was called the King's Oak, and tossed the fragments into the dining room to make cheerful fires for the commissioners. During the first 2 days they heard some strange noises about the house, but they paid no great attention to them. On the third, however, they began to suspect they had got into bad company, for they heard, as they thought, a supernatural dog under their bed, which gnawed their bedclothes. On the next day the chairs and tables began to dance, apparently of their own accord. On the 5th day, something came into the bedchamber and walked up and down, and fetching the warming pan out of the withdrawing room, made so much noise with it that they thought 5 church bells were ringing in their ears. On the 6th day, the plates and dishes were thrown up and down the dining room. On the 7th, they penetrated into the bedroom in company with several logs of wood, and usurped the soft pillows intended for the commissioners. On the 8th and 9th nights, there was a cessation of hostilities, but on the 10th the bricks in the chimneys became locomotive, and rattled and danced about the floors, and round the heads of the commissioners all the night long. On the 11th, the demon ran away with their breeches, and on the 12th filled their beds so full of pewter platters that they could not get into them. On the 13th night, the glass became unaccountably seized with a fit of cracking, and fell into shivers in all parts of the house. On the 14th, there was a noise as if 40 pieces of artillery had been fired off, and a shower of pebble stones, which so alarmed the commissioners, that, struck with great horror, they cried out to one another for help. They first of all tried the efficacy of prayers to drive away the evil spirits, but these proving unavailing, they began seriously to reflect whether it would not be much better to leave the place altogether to the devil that inhabited it. They ultimately resolved, however, to try it a little longer, and having craved forgiveness of all their sins, betook themselves to bed. That night they slept in tolerable comfort, but it was merely a trick of their tormentor to lull them into false security. When, on the succeeding night, they heard no noises, they began to flatter themselves that the devil was driven out, and prepared accordingly to take up their quarters for the whole winter in the palace. These symptoms on their part became the signal for renewed uproar among the fiends. On the 1st of November, they heard something walking with a slow and solemn pace up and down the withdrawing room, and immediately afterwards a shower of stones, bricks, mortar, and broken glass pelted about their ears. On the 2nd the steps were again heard in the withdrawing room, sounding to their fancy very much like the treading of an enormous bear, which continued for about a quarter of an hour. This noise having ceased, a large warming pan was thrown violently upon the table, followed by a number of stones, and the jawbone of a horse. Some of the boldest walked valiantly into the withdrawing room, armed with swords and pistols, but could discover nothing. They were afraid that night to go to sleep, and sat up, making fires in every room, and burning candles and lamps in great abundance, thinking that, as the fiends loved darkness, they would not disturb a company surrounded with so much light. They were deceived, however. Buckets of water came down the chimneys and extinguished the fires, and the candles were blown out, they knew not how. Some of the servants who had betaken themselves to bed were drenched with putrid ditch-water as they lay, and arose in great fright, muttering incoherent prayers, and exposing to the wondering eyes of the commissioners their linen all dripping with green moisture, and their knuckles red with the blows they had at the same time received from some invisible tormentors. While they were still speaking, there was a noise like the loudest thunder, or the firing of a whole park of artillery, upon which they all fell down upon their knees and implored the protection of the Almighty. One of the commissioners then arose, the others still kneeling, and asked in a courageous voice, and in the name of God, who was there, and what they had done that they should be troubled in that manner. No answer was returned, and the noises ceased for a while. At length, however, as the commissioners said, the devil came again, and brought with it 7 devils worse than itself. Being again in darkness, they lighted a candle and placed it in the doorway that it might throw a light upon the 2 chambers at once, but it was suddenly blown out, and one commissioner said that he had seen the similitude of a horse's hoof striking the candle and candlestick into the middle of the chamber, and afterwards making 3 escapes on the snuff to put it out. Upon this, the same person was so bold as to draw his sword, but he asserted positively that he had hardly withdrawn it from the scabbard before an invisible hand seized hold of it and tugged with him for it, and prevailing, struck him so violent a blow with the pommel that he was quite stunned. Then the noises began again, upon which, with one accord, they all retired into the presence chamber, where they passed the night, praying and singing psalms. They were by this time convinced that it was useless to struggle any longer with the powers of evil, that seemed determined to make Woodstock their own. These things happened on the Saturday night, and, being repeated on the Sunday, they determined to leave the place immediately, and return to London. By Tuesday morning early, all their preparations were completed, and shaking the dust off their feet, and devoting Woodstock and all its inhabitants to the infernal gods, they finally took their departure. Many years elapsed before the true cause of these disturbances was discovered. It was ascertained, at the Restoration, that the whole was the work of Giles Sharp, the trusty clerk of the commissioners. This man, whose real name was Joseph Collins, was a concealed royalist, and had passed his early life within the bowers of Woodstock, so that he knew every hole and corner of the place, and the numerous trap-doors and secret passages that abounded in the building. The commissioners, never suspecting the true state of his opinions, but believing him to be revolutionary to the backbone, placed the utmost reliance upon him, a confidence which he abused in the manner above detailed, to his own great amusement, and that of the few cavaliers whom he let into the secret.